Soul Train was not just a television program, it was a cultural movement that changed America in a way no other show had done before. It gave Black artists, dancers, and the community a space where they could be celebrated, represented, and uplifted. Yet, in 2006, after more than 3 decades of success, it suddenly disappeared without any warning or farewell episode. The story of how it began, how it rose to power, and why it ended so suddenly is filled with both triumph and conflict, and the mystery of one final recorded episode that never aired has left fans with questions that still remain unanswered. Don Cornelius, the man who created Soul Train, was born in 1936 on the south side of Chicago. He grew up in an America where racial segregation was still deeply rooted in everyday life. Before he became a television figure, he worked in various jobs to support himself, including being a traffic officer and a salesman. In 1966, his life began to change when he enrolled in a short-term broadcasting course. That decision opened a new door for him, and soon he was hired as a reporter at WCIU-TV, a local Chicago station. It was at WCIU where Cornelius developed the idea of creating a program dedicated to the Black community, a show that would highlight its music, culture, and dance. This dream gave birth to Soul Train, which first aired on August 17, 1970, in Chicago. The earliest episodes featured live performances, local musicians, and dancers from the community. Almost instantly, it captured attention with its high energy, unique style, and boldness. Just over a year later, on October 2, 1971, Soul Train went national with the support of big sponsors like Sears and Johnson Products Company. That move changed television forever. From the moment it went nationwide, Soul Train became a phenomenon. Its music, fashion, and dance styles represented the voice of a generation. The list of artists who graced its stage reads like a history of soul, R&B, and eventually hip-hop itself. Legends such as James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Marvin Gaye, Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5, and later artists like LL Cool J and Mary J. Blige all performed there. For many, performing on Soul Train was not just an appearance, it was a milestone that signaled they had made it into mainstream culture. But Soul Train wasn't just about music. It was also about dance, and one of its most iconic traditions was the Soul Train line. In this segment, dancers would form 2 lines facing each other while individuals or pairs took turns going down the middle, showing off their unique moves. This became more than just entertainment, it was a form of self-expression and freedom. Young people across America tuned in every week, and for many of them, copying the dances they saw on Soul Train became part of their lives. The show also served as a launching pad for dancers who would later find fame. Rosie Perez, Jody Watley, Jeffrey Daniel, and Clinton Gent all started on Soul Train. Jeffrey Daniel in particular went on to join the group Shalamar and played a key role in teaching Michael Jackson the moonwalk, a move that became one of the most famous dance steps in history. Don Cornelius was the driving force behind all of this. He wasn't just the host, he was also the executive producer, editor, and the visionary shaping the show's identity. His calm and serious demeanor gave Soul Train a unique personality, one that stood apart from other music programs of the time. Cornelius believed television should not belong to only one culture but should be a space where all people could be represented positively. For over 3 decades, Soul Train remained the longest-running music program on American television, airing more than 1,000 episodes. During its peak in the late 1970s and early 1980s, the show had weekly ratings of around 4.5 to 5.0, numbers that proved just how popular it was. Fashion and cosmetic companies aimed at the Black community saw Soul Train as the perfect place to promote their products. The show became not just entertainment but also a powerful commercial and cultural platform. The brand eventually expanded beyond television. Soul Train awards, fashion events, and even merchandise added to its legacy. Don Cornelius himself became one of the most influential figures in Black entertainment. Life magazine recognized his impact by naming him one of the 100 most important Americans in 1971. But behind all of the success, there were challenges and conflicts that slowly grew over the years. Cornelius had a reputation for being strict and controlling. He managed not only the music but also how dancers appeared on the show, including their costumes and choreography. Rosie Perez, who was one of the dancers, remembered being told to change her style because Cornelius believed it did not fit the image of the program. Many dancers also revealed that they were never paid for their appearances. For them, being on Soul Train was considered an opportunity, not a job. While it opened doors, many later admitted that they felt used, as their creativity and talent were shown on national television without any direct compensation. The biggest tension, however, came with music itself. As hip-hop began to dominate the late 1980s and early 1990s, Cornelius had difficulty embracing it. He often expressed concern that the genre included negative language and imagery. In a 1992 interview, he bluntly said that he didn't want his show to be overtaken by music that he believed did not represent anything positive. This statement split opinions. Many argued that Cornelius was stuck in the past and failing to recognize the cultural power of hip-hop. Meanwhile, other shows like Yo! MTV Raps and Rap City welcomed the new generation of artists such as Tupac Shakur, Nas, and Snoop Dogg. This shift caused younger audiences to drift away from Soul Train. As a result, viewership dropped significantly. While the ratings were still strong in the 1980s, by the early 2000s they had fallen below 2.0. Local television stations started to replace Soul Train with fresher content. Don Cornelius stepped down as host in 1993 after 23 years. New hosts like Maestro Clark, Shemar Moore, and Dorian Gregory were brought in to keep the show alive, but none of them carried the same weight or charisma that Cornelius had. Even with attempts to update the stage design and bring in more hip-hop acts, the show felt like it was losing its identity. By the early 2000s, production was shrinking. Fewer episodes were made, and many longtime staff members left the team. Editors and technical crew moved on, and investors began questioning whether the show was still worth supporting. The costs were high, and the cultural impact was fading. Cornelius himself withdrew from the public eye, rarely appearing or speaking about Soul Train anymore. Then came 2006, the year everything ended. Soul Train was already struggling, but during one taping session in Los Angeles, something happened that sealed its fate. That day, the atmosphere was tense. The production team had been reshuffled, the guest lineup was disorganized, and there was a clear lack of leadership. Rumors suggest Don Cornelius was present backstage, even though he no longer played an official role. According to people who were there, he expressed his unhappiness with the direction the show had taken. The scheduled guest was a rising hip-hop artist, but the show started almost an hour late due to disputes between the artist's team and Soul Train staff. When the performance finally began, it shocked many. The choreography, costumes, and visual presentation went far beyond what had traditionally been allowed on Soul Train. It clashed completely with the values and image Cornelius had built for decades. Reports say Cornelius intervened, calling for the editing process to stop and requesting an emergency meeting with Soul Train's distribution partners. This moment led to one of the biggest blows the show ever faced. Tribune Entertainment, a major distributor, pulled out of the deal. Without them, Soul Train could no longer air nationally. Within 3 weeks of that taping, more than 40% of local affiliates dropped the program. The episode that caused the uproar was never aired. It became the lost episode of Soul Train, locked away and never shown to the public. No formal announcement of cancellation was ever made, but the silence spoke louder than words. The official website stopped updating, affiliates stopped airing, and by the end of 2006, Soul Train was gone. The end of Soul Train was quiet compared to its powerful history. For decades, it had been a stage where artists found their voices, dancers discovered their talent, and the Black community saw itself reflected with pride and dignity. It gave America some of the most iconic cultural moments of the 20th century. But as times changed, the clash between tradition and new cultural forces became too much for the show to handle. Even though it ended in mystery, Soul Train remains one of the most influential programs in American television history. It shaped music, fashion, and dance in ways that are still felt today. Its legacy lives on not only through the artists and dancers it helped launch but also through the cultural pride it gave to millions of viewers who tuned in every week to watch the train of soul roll on. The story of Soul Train's ending is one filled with mystery, silence, and deep cultural meaning. For decades, The show had been a symbol of joy, identity, and representation for millions of viewers. It wasn't just a music and dance program, it was a place where Black culture was celebrated at a time when American television rarely allowed such freedom. Yet, its final years were marked not by a grand farewell, but by an abrupt and quiet disappearance that left behind unanswered questions. The time slot that once carried the show was given to other programs, and the production schedule was suddenly cancelled without warning. This was not the kind of ending anyone expected for one of the most iconic television shows in history. Soon after, whispers of a buried episode began to spread. Media reports suggested that this lost taping was the real reason the show went off the air. Though it never aired, footage from that day remained in the hands of a few staff members, and word of it leaked into fan pages and discussion boards. People began calling it the cursed performance. The controversy around this single episode went far beyond one disrupted taping. It symbolized the unspoken ending of Soul Train, leaving behind scars not only for its creator, Don Cornelius, but also for those who loved the show. When Soul Train vanished in 2006, the silence that followed was deafening. Don Cornelius, who had been the heart and soul of the program from the beginning, refused to give interviews. He turned away from the media completely. In one rare appearance on a local radio station the following year, he simply said, "I think it went far enough." Those few words revealed exhaustion, frustration, and perhaps even sadness. Many believed that Cornelius felt betrayed by a system he no longer recognized. Once, he had full control of his creation, but in its final stretch, the show had shifted into other hands and other visions that did not match his own. The man who had given the world Soul Train withdrew almost completely from public life. For those who had been part of the program, the ending felt confusing and cold. Dancers, hosts, and guest performers recalled the suddenness of it all. Rosie Perez described it as an unnamed sadness, a hollow feeling that something beautiful had been taken away too soon. Dorian Gregory, who hosted the show in its last stretch, admitted that no one on the team was clearly told what was happening. They only realized it was over when the taping schedules disappeared. Independent media began searching for answers. Vibe magazine published an article in 2008, claiming that ratings were not the issue at all. Instead, trust had fallen apart. Internal struggles, disagreements, and a lack of direction had damaged the foundation Cornelius had built. Although the Soul Train Awards, which began in 1987, continued after the show's cancellation, they no longer carried the same spirit. By 2009, BET had taken control, and the ceremonies shifted into something more modern, rarely acknowledging the golden years of Soul Train. For longtime viewers, it felt like a piece of history had been erased without an explanation. The sense of loss grew heavier as fans realized that the vibrant Saturday afternoons they once cherished were gone forever. Still, something remarkable happened. While the show itself ended, Soul Train found new life in the digital age. Old VHS recordings, taped off television by devoted fans decades earlier, started appearing on YouTube. Performances from the 1970s and 1980s attracted millions of views. A new generation discovered the music, the dances, and the fashion. Young viewers, who hadn't been born when the show first aired, became fans of the unique style and cultural energy it represented. Yet, while the early years shined online, the turbulent 2000s remained largely ignored, almost as though they had been erased. As the show's memory continued to spread online, Don Cornelius faced personal troubles. In 2008, he was arrested on domestic violence charges, though he did not serve jail time. These troubles only added to the weight he already carried. Then in 2012, the world received devastating news. Cornelius died by suicide in his Los Angeles home. His death stunned fans and left behind an ocean of unanswered questions. The Los Angeles Times described it best, writing that although he was a trailblazer, Cornelius left the stage in the quietest way possible. After his passing, television historians began to re-examine the meaning of Soul Train. Some believed its legacy was fragmented, incomplete. Others argued that the show had already fulfilled its purpose, and its quiet ending was simply the natural conclusion of a cultural era. But there was no denying that the mysterious events of 2006 still haunted its story. People began referring to it as the Soul Train curse. Though it was more symbolic than literal, the phrase captured the uneasy feeling that the ending carried with it. When one looked at the lives of the dancers, staff, and even Cornelius himself, it was hard to ignore the emotional weight that lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The financial loss of the show's end was nothing compared to the emotional scars it left behind. Many former staff members admitted they still carried that burden heavily. Even though it ended quietly, Soul Train refused to fade from memory. Its influence was too powerful, too deeply rooted in American culture. Almost 20 years after the final broadcast, the program continues to inspire documentaries, dramas, museum exhibits, and cultural tributes. Each project proves that Soul Train remains alive in the spirit of those who cherished it. In 2019, BET released a full-length series titled American Soul, a dramatized biopic of Don Cornelius. Actor Sinqua Walls played the role of Cornelius, bringing to life the early days of the show during a turbulent time in American society. The series revealed struggles the public had never seen, including the constant fight to protect Black identity in an industry dominated by white executives. Although the show did not directly explore the fateful 2006 episode, it shed light on the pressures that existed behind the glamour of Soul Train. Museums also began to recognize the show's importance. The Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture now holds Soul Train artifacts, such as original costumes worn by dancers and performers. Scholars began calling for Soul Train to be preserved like Motown, seeing it as more than just a TV show but as an artistic and cultural movement. Meanwhile, YouTube became a living archive where fans old and new could relive the magic. Clips, interviews, and even personal backstage footage circulated widely, keeping the energy alive. What surprised many was how younger audiences embraced Soul Train. Those born after 2000, who had no memory of its original broadcasts, began imitating its style. On social media, dance challenges inspired by the famous Soul Train line went viral. In 2021, the #Soul Train challenge swept across platforms, with artists like Lizzo, Anderson.Paak, and her participating. Fans recreated the fashion of the 1970s, through themed parties, and celebrated a show that had ended before they were even alive. Soul Train became not only a memory but a source of creativity for new generations. Scholars and fans alike now push for a complete restoration of the series, from 1971 to 2006. Many early episodes have been digitally remastered and released on streaming platforms, allowing the world to once again see classic performances in high quality. But the final seasons remain largely untouched. The very last episode, taped in 2006, still exists but has never been released. Many believe it never will, due to legal issues and the sensitive content it may contain. That missing piece remains one of television's greatest mysteries. Even so, the true legacy of Soul Train does not lie in one final episode. It lives in the larger story of what the show represented. It was never just about music or dancing. It was about giving Black Americans a stage where they could see themselves proud, stylish, talented, and celebrated on national television. In the early 1970s, at a time when racism and segregation were still deeply rooted in American life, Soul Train was a cultural declaration. It said to the world, "We exist, we matter, and we will shine." The silence of 2006 could not erase that message. In fact, it made the show even more legendary. The abrupt disappearance turned Soul Train into an unfinished icon, leaving the public hungry for answers. But what remains is far more powerful than mystery. It is the memory of generations who tuned in every week, who danced in their living rooms, who believed that for 1 hour every Saturday, the television belonged to them. It is the reminder that representation matters, that joy can be revolutionary, and that art can outlive even the darkest endings. Though it has been almost 20 years since Soul Train ended, the values it carried remain alive. Its fashion, its music, its dances, and above all, its spirit of cultural pride continue to influence artists and audiences around the world. Don Cornelius may have left the world in silence, but the light he lit through Soul Train still burns brightly. Sometimes, the things that never air, the moments that remain hidden, are the ones that history remembers the most. The so-called cursed episode may never be seen, but the world will always remember the joy, the pride, and the history Soul Train gave us.